Morning. Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to 10 Minutes of Torah. We're back. It's been a long time, but I am eager to kick off this new time period with Torah, with the optimism and the wisdom and the insights and the guidance of Torah that we need now more than ever. But before I do that, let me preface by saying the following. Somebody sent me a WhatsApp clip, a video clip last night, and told me, go to 12 minutes and 30 seconds. And it was a video clip of me receiving, after Simchas Torah, I must have been 13 years old at the time, a blessing from the Rebbe after Simchat Torah. And after Simchas Torah, they would make Havdalah, and the Rebbe would stand in line for hours. After long and grueling Yom Tov celebrations, the Rebbe would stand in line and pour a little cup of wine to thousands of people and bless them. And it was called Kosher Bracha, a cup of blessing. And it was a very special moment for me to see that, although I carry the memories of those childhood experiences with me all the time. And on many levels, I feel like I'm still drinking from that cup of blessing, that kosher bracha. And I would like to suggest today that that cup of blessing is a cup that we can all drink from, and that we are now, given the current realities, we're more thirsty than ever, and we need to have a cup filled with blessing to nourish us and nurture us. And I don't know about you, I drink coffee in the morning, but everyone makes fun of me that I kind of nurse the coffee throughout the morning, and well after it's not hot anymore. And so everyone always asks me, why are you drinking cold coffee? And so the truth of the matter is that it's still coffee, even if it's cold. It's iced coffee. So there are certain memories that we have, and there are certain resources that we can drink from. Sometimes it's a little warmer, sometimes it's not, but it's always something that can jolt us, that can caffeinate us. And I would like to suggest that the opening portion of Breishit that we begin reading this week, we start the Torah from the very beginning, is what we can fill our cups with. And the empty cups that we are facing today are easily understood in another one of the frameworks of the ending of the high holidays. And the Rebbe would speak about this a lot as the holidays were winding down. He would lean on a drashic or Talmudic understanding of Shmini Atzeret, which was a time that was unlike the first days of Sukkot, which had a very heavy focus on universal connection of all people. There were 70 offerings that were offered in the temple that corresponded to the 70 nations of the world. The God of Israel is the God of all people. And yet, on the last day, Shmini Atzeret, there was a single offering. And in a certain sense, this was just leaning back in towards a different, a more intimate setting where God is celebrating with the Jewish people and reinforcing the particular covenant that he made with them. And in this midrashic understanding that it's understood in terms of a king and his ministers, his close ministers. And on one hand, he's kind of gathering them together in a more closed setting. On the other hand, and so that's wonderful. There's a certain intimacy and beauty to that. On the other hand, it's bittersweet, and there's a sadness there because he also realizes that he's going to say goodbye to them. The pilgrims in the actual Shmini Atzeret celebration, stepping away from the metaphor for a second, these were all pilgrims that had made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and they were starting to journey back the next day after the holidays. And so there was this sense of sadness and almost like a panic. And I'll paraphrase. It's the king says, "Kasha alai predaschem," your departure weighs heavily on me. And I always felt very emotional when I heard the Rebbe talking about that, because on many levels, the Rebbe was also talking to his many emissaries that were going back to remote places. And when I was a child, there was no Twitter and Facebook and social media or cell phones. And that was saying goodbye was much more of a goodbye than saying goodbye today. And so it was a very sentimental moment, a very touching moment. And I'd like to kind of borrow that framework to describe what we're experiencing now culturally and on an interbeing connection that has really been challenged by coronavirus and the quasi separation. So many of us didn't see one another throughout the high holidays. I mean, it was surreal. And so I would like to rephrase that. Kasha alai predaschem is not the king sad about his leaving. It's more a sadness of the king who is observing predaschem, your separation, the ways that you are not capable of being in contact with one another, even though, and that was always kind of a calming, a reassuring notion that even though we weren't with the Rebbe, but we had one another. So society today doesn't have one another. So the kasha alai predaschem, it's hard. You can imagine on a metaphysical level, God or a king of the universe not worried about his people leaving, and being separate from him, but sad. The kasha, the difficulty is about the separation amongst themselves. And so it's in that framework that we have to really fill that cup up with whatever we can to sustain us in this separateness, which is a deep separateness, and a troubling and painful one. So let's see if we can fill our cups with the blessing of Genesis, of Breishit, of some of the key verses, the classic verses that open up the first book of the first portion of the first book of the Torah. And we'll start with the very beginning. Breishit bara Elokim. In the beginning, God created. The Targum Onkelos interprets Breishit not as beginning, but uses a little bit of a play of words and says that the word Breishit refers to chuchmasa, or chachma, wisdom. And so God created the world with wisdom. And so there's a certain blessing in that. Something we can pour into our cup is the blessing of wisdom or mindfulness that is very vague, because we don't have that as many answers as we need. And the wisdom that God used to create the world in the beginning of creation was also very vague. It was not a fully developed wisdom. It was a point. The beginning of all thinking and thoughts has to begin somewhere. Geometry as well. Every mathematical equation has to begin with a vague, unknowable point. And that's the point of chachma. It's the point of wisdom, of a knowledge, of an intuitive understanding of things that is not something you can put into words. It doesn't have any way of expressing. That comes later, as a thought gets developed into understanding and is articulated in vocabulary. But in the beginning, it's just a point, and that's the point put into our cups, so that it will be a blessing for us. The not necessarily the knowledge of the answers, but the knowledge that the answers are there. Even all the ancient mathematicians understood that that point that they couldn't understand was the beginning of everything. And if you move that point just a drop, it becomes a line. And then if you connect that line to another line, you have space and dimensionality is born. But pre-dimension, like now, pre-answers or pre-vaccine, it leaves us with more questions than answers. But there is a blessing in knowing that we have chokhmah. We have the ability to lean in to whatever it is that's happening right now, and just be in it and have the faith that the point will then connect to another point and create a line, and we'll have a better grasp of it. So that's one thing we can put into our cup of blessing. Another thing is something you all are very familiar with. In the beginning of creation, it says, "The haaretz hayta tohu vavo." It was void and empty. And the Talmud says that God created bona olamos machrivan, that from this void, from this non-substance, world was created, and the proportion of the energy and the ability to process the energy was off, and so the world was created and then destroyed. God destroyed the world. like a do-over, a bunch of times till he got it right. The question is, why is the Torah telling us this? Aren't we talking about an omnipotent, perfect, infinite being that doesn't, do sketching and diagrams and blueprints, just is perfect from the first go? And the truth of the matter is that it's Torah Tziva Lanu. It's the Torah that's given to us, and therefore there's something very powerful in our ability to pour that into our cup, the ability to start again, the capacity to reinvent ourselves when, on a certain level, everything that we are familiar with has been destroyed. Like Rabbi Akiva began building after 24,000 of his students were perished in a plague. And as Jewish history is replete with this paradigm, we can pour that in our cup too, the knowledge of our history, that throughout our history, whether it was in the Babylonian dispersion or the Byzantine era or in Poland or Germany, so many of the worlds that we so painstakingly created from nothing, from tohu vavo, were then destroyed. And we then went and began building again. And so we can pour that ability to be godlike by having the guts to recreate a different kind of world when an old way of being has been dismantled. So that's another thing that we can put into our cup and take with us. V'ruach Elokim merachefet al pnei hamayim. The Spirit of God hovered over the water. It's a beautiful passage. The Torah reminds us here that the presence of God is dynamic and is moving back and forth and back and forth. And there's almost a sense of a cosmic restlessness. And that's our legacy. That's something we can pour into our cup, not to be so easily satisfied with whatever status quo we have, but to push the limits, to push the envelope of whatever it is that we can impact and be unsatisfied. And it's like a spiritual greediness that is okay to want more, to demand more of ourselves. That would be pouring that cosmic godly restlessness into our cup and just pushing ourselves. And that's something that can lighten the predaschem, the kasha, the difficulty, the harshness of our solitude, of our quasi relative solitude. The Rebbe was. It's interesting. The Rebbe had embodied this restlessness, this refusal to accept the status quo and to push us and to. The Rebbe also moved very quickly. If you ever saw the Rebbe when he was coming in to 770 or coming from upstairs to downstairs for mincha, the Rebbe moved so fast. Even into his later years, he was elderly, but he moved faster than most young people. And somebody once asked him why he's moving so fast. He said he was born on Erev Shabbat. And on Erev Shabbat, we got to move fast. There's so much to do. And so he never stopped. And the Rebbe was the quintessential embodiment of the Ruach Elokim, that mirachefet, that is just probing and pushing and not resting. an anti-complacency was written all over everything that he did and said. Vayerev vayivoker, yom echad. It was morning, and it was evening, and it was one day. The notion of Erev is darkness, but the word Erev comes from the word arvuvia, which is confusion. And we can look around us and see that we are living through a time that's characterized by arvuvia, by confusion, by darkness, and very easily given to despair. It's very easy, and it's been challenging for so many people. This shift, this fundamental shift in the way we're living, filled with this existential dread all the time, and then we conquer it and we ignore it, and then we're reminded of it. So it's very much, there's a lot of confusion because there's a constant flow of often contradictory facts, and so we do everything, we work so hard just to get to the bottom of things, and so one could very easily give in to despondency and allow the darkness to determine our state and be dark. And the beauty of the notion of the day beginning at the night is very powerful here. And that's something we can pour into our cup. Every Erev, every arvuvia, every confusion, as extensive as it is followed by Boker, is followed by the crack of dawn, and is only then a new day. And so when we are confronted with darkness, whenever it is, or whatever circumstance it is, we have to look deeper into our soulfulness and identify the boker, the morning, the light that is there. I guess the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel is what we can add to our growing cup of blessing. Vayara Elokim et ha'or ki tov. God saw that the light was good. And so Rashi questions, what light is he talking about? And it's clear that this was not like electromagnetic light. There was no one. There was a void. And so Rashi understands it as a spiritual light that was so good and so pure and pristine that it was too good. And Rashi paraphrases I believe the Talmud in Chagiga that says that this light was installed and then withdrawn and reserved in the world to come for the righteous. And Kabbalah teaches us that and drills down into this notion of this and world to come as paradigms that can be identified here and now. So on a soul level, we each carry a world to come dimension within us that has a spark of this light. And we can pour that into our cup as well. Call it hope, call it faith, call it optimism, call it a good disposition. But it's something that we have, and we can drink from that and be nurtured from it. In addition, we have the fact that we were created b'tselem Elokim. When the Torah talks about God creating man, it says man was created in God's image, which is pretty powerful. God and the Lurianic Kabbalistic school of thought explained how it's possible even for a human being who's a finite, limited creature could have emanated from the infinite God. The notion of tzimtzum, of God withdrawing the full splendor of his being so that he wouldn't overwhelm a physical being into oblivion. And so the notion of pulling back and creating space for another is a godly precedent. And that's something we have to bear in mind in our interactions. But in addition, it's also what allowed for us to carry God's image, to be created in God's image, and to fulfill our role as agents of God. We are all here in the world. Each of us is here to ultimately reintroduce and rediscover whatever godly energy was drawn back. We want to pull that back out into the world, obviously, through our vessels, as the Kabbalah says, through our limited vehicles, but it's drawing that back into the world, and we have the ability to be shluchim of God, to bring God's light into the world. And there's a Talmudic saying that's a shlucho shel adam kamoso, an agent of a person takes on that person's energy and characteristics. So that would jive with the notion of tselem Elokim, that whatever we have to face, whatever adversity we're dealing with it as an agent of the Ribono Shel Olam. And so we have the power of that tselem, of that image, that we can pour into our kos shel bracha as well. One or two quick ideas to finish this off. God says to both the human and animal world, blesses them with the ability to reproduce, pru urvu, and the vegetative world had some kind of a built-in mechanism that didn't require that proactive biological push, but the animal kingdom and the human had that blessing of pruvu, of filling, be fruitful and multiply. But there was a distinction. When God blessed the animals with the blessing of being able to reproduce, the Torah says, Vayomer Elokim, God says, pru urvu. In introducing that very same blessing to man, there's an additional phrase. It says that God blessed them, and God said. Whoa, this is something very unique and powerful. This is the first moment that God talks, addresses, communicates orally with man. And he gives them the ability to elevate the basic biological reproductive capability to ethno-moral plane, and I'm not just speaking about procreation, I'm speaking about be fruitful and multiply in the broader sense of the word, of just make good things happen in the world. And we suddenly have this vayomer, God speaking to us, that creates an imperative. You ought to do something. It's not just you can do it, which raises it up to a whole different category. And so we have that as well to pour, that divine speech, the imperative, the grammatical imperative form being introduced in Genesis is a very powerful tool in our toolkit. And I think we'll finish with another interesting idea. It says that when God blessed the human being with the ability to be fruitful and multiply and to rule over the seas and the fish in the seas, it says, umilu et haaretz, and fill the world. Now, what does that mean? So again, taking it beyond its literal procreative sense to the wider, broader filling the world, it talks about it's talking about the fact that the human being has the ability to move, to fill the world, literally, not being we're not tied down to one particular terrestrial location. We can readjust. We can move wherever we want. We're not like the fish. We're not tied to our environment, and we on a certain level, it's a definition that is integral to who we are as human beings. We're not mentally defined in a provincial way. We are cosmopolitans. We are citizens of the world. We have the ability to move. And the question becomes, suddenly now, we don't. We've become geographically very provincial, very much tied to our geographical locations. And so, is it about this that we can pour into our cups this ability to move and to explore and to connect with other people in other regions, to be universal human as opposed to being tied to one place? How does that? It's going against our nature, and the truth of the matter is that it's the exact opposite. The cup of blessing in being incapable of a regionality, a flexibility to move around, and being tied physically, practically speaking, to where we are, that is our new region. That is our new place. We have traveled to this unique place that you can't travel to. You can't travel anymore. And so that is a new territory itself. And, there's this saying, there's a bumper sticker that says, think globally, act locally. Well, that's exactly what's happening right now, is that to a large extent, aside from the fact that we're so interconnected electronically and digitally, we're challenged to sit still and at the same time give free rein to our restlessness in creative and original ways, to find a certain cosmopolitan, universal identity within the framework of being tied to a very precise location. That is the milu et haaretz. And in this case, it's not milu et haaretz geographically. It's not filling the world geographically. Milu et haaretz, filling the world substantively. In the moment of restrictedness that we are in, we have the unique challenge of being asked to find an expansiveness within that very narrow space. And so these are just some of the things we can pour into that kos shel bracha. And if you think about it, our cup runneth over. We have so many blessings that we can drink from, that we can be nurtured by, that we can be nourished by. And we still have one another, even in this separation. But look, we're doing this as a blessing. So let's continue to stay in touch. Let's continue to strengthen one another. Let's continue to be very positive and upbeat about good days coming. And I look forward to talking to you soon and connecting. Yom Tov.